before you go out to the forward area and take part in an atomic detonation?
Basically, there are only three things to think about: blast, heat, and radiation.
They had us turn our backs towards the blast before they detonated us and told us to hold our hands over our eyes, which we did. As the bomb detonated, we could see every bone in our hands through our closed eyelids, just like an extra large X-ray.
The radiation level may be high, but if you follow orders, you'll be moved out in time to avoid sickness. Finally, if you receive enough gamma radiation to cause sterility or severe sickness, you'll be killed by blast, flying debris, or heat anyway.
On this one particular bomb that we participated in, we was approximately 3,000 yards from ground zero. We was originally supposed to be in trenches 3,000 yards from ground zero when it detonated.
Over 250,000 military personnel were exposed to atomic tests in Nevada and at Eniwetok and Bikini.
They hauled out some brooms and gave us the brush off before we left position 2 for camp. Decontamination, they called it, in case we had some radioactive particles on us.
It was, so the troops had been advised. A bad weapon to have against you, a good one to have on your side. It left no radiological hazards for the troops it supported. Its radioactive cloud rose high and drifted harmlessly away.
What was to the west of the Nevada test site, which was Los Angeles, had to be protected. And so they waited always for the westerly winds to establish themselves thoroughly before every test. And so the result was that every atmospheric test that was conducted by the United States rained fallout over the whole country.
In April of 1953, the wind carried an enormous fallout cloud from a nuclear test in Nevada across the country. The following night, the fallout encountered thunderclouds over upper New York State. Rainfall in puddles near Albany was measured the next morning to have 200,000 times more radioactivity than normal.
The fallout was most intense at the site itself, where there were workers, and downwind from the site in Nevada and Utah, in places like St. George.
Janet Gordon, a member of a sheep ranching family, lived in Cedar City, Utah, 120 miles east of the Nevada test site. She and others who lived downwind of nuclear test sites became known as downwinders.
The nuclear testing in Nevada started when I was 12 years old, and we were not given any warning at all. The testing just began. We began to see effects right away, and a few people began to question. In 1953, for instance, the sheep, many of the sheep died, and the sheep ranchers questioned. All kinds of wildlife died, the birds, the insects, and we wondered about the nuclear testing and if it had any effect. And in fact, some of the sheep ranchers brought a lawsuit. We were told over and over and over again by our government that there was no connection, that the deaths of the animals and the people were either malnutrition or an unknown combination of factors, none of which were radiation.
And they'd put a Geiger counter on them like that, the dead ones, and they'd say, boy, this is a hot one. This is taking the needle clear off the post. So I figured it was radiation.
Within a month of the tests, in the spring of 1953, Kern Bullock and other downwind sheep ranchers lost over 4,000 head of sheep, nearly 40% of the sheep population. These were among the first victims of atmospheric testing in the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to bring you important news. Word has just been received from the Atomic Energy Commission that due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George. It is suggested that everyone remain indoors for 1 hour or until further notice. There is no danger.
Frank Butrico was a radiation safety monitor for the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission. In the early 50s, he was stationed in St. George, Utah. He recalls the test which sent a dark purple cloud toward southern Utah, a test which became known as Dirty Harry.
The instruments were off the scale, and the scale of the instrument was the maximum was 300 MR.
Butrico later testified that those readings, thousands of times higher than normal, compelled him to destroy his clothes and take several showers that day. But he was instructed by his superiors to downplay the dangers faced by St. George residents.
The feeling at Mercury at the test site was that we had to tell people something, and best we not create any panic that there was any excessive amount of radiation that could be harmful.
After Dirty Harry, Butrico and the residents of St. George were recruited to play themselves in an AEC film made to reassure the downwind population.
Actually, when the invisible cloud had passed, the total amount of radiation deposited on St. George was far from hazardous. The Atomic Energy Commission doesn't take chances on safety.
A lot of those people who are in that film have since died from cancer. I've lost 13 members of my immediate family, including my wife, my sister, niece, mother-in-law, uncles, aunts, cousins who have died from cancer. There are several of us still living who are suffering from problems that, in my estimation again, are radiation-induced, that are the result of the exposure that we received during that time period. So it has been a very devastating effect upon my family and other families in the area. Go back as far as we can in our family histories. We have not had one single case of any kind of cancer prior to this fallout. Since then, we're just filled with it.
As the bomb cloud drifts downwind, all of the largest and heaviest particles fall to the Earth in the next few hours or days. Now, this fresh fallout emits great quantities of deadly but invisible gamma rays, like the output of a mammoth X-ray machine.
The fallout entered the food chain most immediately through contaminated grass eaten by dairy cows. The radioactive iodine in the milk became concentrated in the thyroid glands of people throughout the region. Dr. Harold Knapp conducted the first Atomic Energy Commission study on the health effects of fallout. His focus was the radiation doses to children in southern Utah.
And my calculations for the areas around the test site within a few hundred miles indicated that the doses to the thyroids of children there might have been in the ranges of hundreds of rads to the thyroid. And this was 100 times, perhaps, greater than any dose to any organ that anybody had ever anticipated from fallout before. And so naturally it was a matter of great concern to me and to everyone who had some responsibility for it.
Knapp later testified in court that actual fallout may have been 1,000 times the amount measured by monitors. His fallout study was ridiculed by his superiors at the AEC. He was attacked and his study suppressed, until an expert committee urged that it be published. A member of that committee was Dr. John Goffman.
It became quite evident early that the entire pattern for the Atomic Energy Commission was to attempt virtually to destroy the credibility and the character of people who criticized the Atomic Energy Commission's attitude on health effects. I just find that they simply were not leveling with the public. When you had people that talked about white snow, when you had the situation with the sheep, when you had people losing their hair or getting skin burns, you should really lean over on the side of expecting that those people might have had the high doses.
53, there was a test series which was very dirty. It included Dirty Harry. Nancy, Badger, 13 tests in the series. And one night my brother came back into camp. It was during spring lambing. He was ill. He had burns on his skin. He was throwing up. He had a severe headache. And he said that when he rode down into the low brushy areas, it was like a ground fog. And he could feel it on his skin. Women who worked outside in their yards had their hair coming out in patches at the same time. And then a few years later, my brother developed cancer of the pancreas. He was 26 years old when he died. And it made me very, very angry because I knew that that cancer was caused by the radiation, and I knew that it had killed my brother.
As a child, Claudia Peterson played with her sister in radioactive dust down